One thing that CSS is not short on is the syntax available to specify property values. This is probably because there are so many things that you have to specify, like colors of a background, the size of a font, the width of a table. Some of these property values are set using dedicated keywords like thin, thick, and larger. You cannot use these keywords just anywhere, only on specific properties where CSS allows them. For example, you can use thin to specify the width of a border, but it wouldn't work when setting a font. When specifying sizes, CSS offers a wide array of measurements. You can use inches, centimeters, millimeters, and points. Point measurements are generally associated with fonts, as you've probably learned when using a word processor, and 1 point is 1/72nd of an inch. You can also specify measurements using pixels. There are also relative measurements like percentages and ems. Ems are quite popular these days because a relative measurement allows you to scale well and allows your design to adapt to different devices. Color codes we have seen, and there are keywords, hexadecimal numbers, and the RGB style that you can use for colors. Fonts have a special case syntax. We'll dig into this syntax more in a later module. And finally, there are a couple examples of functional notation with CSS, not only with RGB colors, but also when you have to specify a URL, like for a background image. Let's see an example of some of these in a demo. I'm going to switch over to using Visual Studio to edit my style sheet, because Visual Studio knows what can go into a CSS file. It understands the syntax, and it can help me out a little bit if I don't understand what keywords are available. So for instance, if I want to increase the size of the fonts inside of a paragraph, then I know that I want to change the font size, but I may not know that I can choose from extra large or extra small or extra large. So let me just try extra large and refresh the browser, and I can see that the text grows a little bit. And because this is a font, I can also specify font sizes using points. So I could say that font size should be 28 points. That's going to be a significantly larger increase. And I can also specify ems. So an em of 1.0 is the current size of the font for this page. So this should reset it to what it looked like originally. But I could also say that this text should be 1.5 times bigger than what the default size is. So let me refresh this, and we've grown about 50%. I might also want to change the border that is around these paragraph tags. And again, that's something that we'll be talking about a little bit in a later module. But for now, what I can do is I can say that the border style is going to be a solid line around this paragraph tag. And I can say that the border color is going to be black. Later, we'll learn a shortcut for some of this. And then the border width. This can be a keyword like thick. So let me try to save this and refresh. There you can see a thick black border, a thick black solid border that's around the paragraph. And border width is something that I could specify using, let's say, pixels. So I want this to be 12 pixels. I could also specify millimeters or centimeters, cm. Let's try 12 millimeters. But this is a little bit too much, so let's change it back to 2 millimeters. That seems like a much more reasonable border. I can also set the width of this paragraph tag. One way to do that is using percentages. So I can say that the width of this paragraph tag should be 50%. And the answer might be, well, 50% of what? And it's 50% essentially of the parent. That means that in this case, it's 50% of the width of the window itself. But what if I go in here and I say that all divs should have a width of 50%? Now, if I refresh the page, you'll notice that this paragraph is half the size of the paragraph above it. And that's because this paragraph is inside of a div whose width is 50% of the page, and its width is 50% of that 50%, so therefore it's about a quarter of the page that it has available to expand its width. If this is not the behavior that I want, I can go in and I could say all paragraph tags do not use a relative unit of measurement. Instead, just set yourselves to 200 pixels. That way it doesn't matter how big the parent is. I also wanted to show you an example of setting a background image that is done using the URL function in CSS. Inside of here, I could specify the HTTP URL to an image anywhere on the internet. I can also use relative URLs. In this case, I have a background.jpg image in the same directory as the CSS style sheet, and that's where the browser will load these images from relative to the location of where the style sheet is, unless you have a fully qualified URL inside of there. But by putting this here, I should be able to save and see that background image. Now the text here is a little bit too dark. It's not easy to see on that dark background. There's a couple different ways I could fix that. I could come in to the body and I could say that the default foreground for everything here should be white. But I also wanted to introduce you to the star selector, which is a way of saying everything matches and everything should have a color of white. That would also work. If all of these settings and measurements are a little bit overwhelming, that's when you can lean on the tool a little bit more. So for instance, Visual Studio, when you're building a style, you can actually come into the menu, click Build Style, and inside of here, all of these different properties are categorized. So here are background properties, border properties, position properties, font properties, and there's drop-down lists and aids to help you pick things like, do I want pixels or ems or points or centimeters or percentages?